Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. After a week's hiatus, Nate was in Las Vegas, but we will not, and Phoenix, but we can't tell you what he did in Las Vegas because you're not supposed to do that. In Phoenix, you climbed a peak, right?
I did. 2 mountains, Camelback and Pinnacle Peak. So I had to sacrifice spring training to do it. So that was a sad thing, but we're going to get baseball tomorrow and I'll cheer back up. And it was worth it to get to the peak.
That'd be a real tough one for me. That's like 2 of my favorite things going against each other, hiking or baseball. I don't know what I would do. I would probably try to squeeze in both somehow.
That would have been the smarter thing to do, but come together.
The Colts, since the last time we talked, I mean, I had talked about trying to find something to do. Didn't really work out last week for the pod. The Colts haven't really done a ton since the initial flurry of free agency. And so I think with the owners meetings coming up, I'm going to the owners meetings next week. We'll have some quotes, at least from Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, hoping that we get something from Jim Irsay that we'll be able to discuss next week, kind of move the conversation forward. But for now, I think for this pod, we just want to go through, where we see the needs right now. And I think the way we're going to do this, I'm just going to ping pong it back and forth. I'm going to let you start out by giving me your biggest need, and we'll kind of talk through it. And then we'll kind of go back and forth until we're out of stuff to do. So what need sticks out to you the most going forward in terms of, the hole on the roster, how you might address it, all that stuff?
Well, you're going to tee me up with the easiest one because I think they need.
You were on vacation last week. I'm trying to help out.
I know. I'm going to have to dive too deep on this one, but let me go tight end, and tight end. They need 4 tight ends. I mean, they do. I mean, right? Like Mo Alley Cox is still free agent. So
yes.
Colin Granson left. This is me trying to remember where all these people went. He signed with some other team, but they're down to.
Granson is in Philly.
Right. So they've got Drew Ogletree, Jelani Woods,
Will Mallory.
So among that group, that's one guy that has basically missed 2 straight seasons, or not basically has missed 2 straight seasons since Jelani Woods. Will Mallory, who, if they were super invested and interested in him, I think they would have played him more last year when they weren't getting much out of position. Drew Ogletree, I think, is what he is. He's he could block some, but their production is just totally non-existent there. They were last or dead next to last in basically every tight end receiving mark last year. And then I don't think the blocking, it wasn't like those guys ascended to a high level collectively there either. So they need a lot there. And so that's where I wondered if they would do like a small move in free agency, because it made so much sense to wait for the draft class. It's just not every year do you get a lot of options at tight end in the draft. It's usually one of the black holes, including last year. It was Brock Bowers or don't even bother. And this year you have a lot of different types of guys and rounds and values to talk yourself into for the first round, to the second round, to the third round. So that makes a lot of sense, but they need multiple of these guys. So I still think ideally that's where like you'd sign the blocking tight end, guys more experienced and physically developed in free agency for not a lot of money. Maybe they bring Mo Alley Cox back that way and draft one, but also it could make sense to where maybe because there's so many options in this draft class and a lot of teams are, going to zero in on it and fight for some of these guys. It also could make sense to wait to sign guys until after the draft at that position. So, how they fit together. If they end up with Tyler Warren, that's your kind of very much a do-it-all tight end, I think opens up to where you could go for a flex guy or, a blocking specific. Whereas if they end up with a guy like Colston Loveland, who's a little bit more of your flex offline tight end, that's different. You don't want to necessarily go sign another Colin Granson type. You're going to need a true inline blocker at that level. So it's setting up nicely to be able to do that. But of course, the big question is always going to be like, I think they have to make that position happen in the first 2 rounds, because part of the issue they've gotten into over the years since Jack Doyle retired is they've tried these mid-round investments and none of them have come together. Jelani Woods was a 3rd-round pick. Now that's mostly been unfortunate injuries, but the player we saw there was enticing, but not, he had a lot of development, a lot like raw player coming in. Kylan Granson hasn't, he provided a little bit of a, production floor for a bit there, but seemed to have a very defined ceiling. Will Mallory was a 5th-round pick. That has not developed as quickly as they'd like. They're going for these really developmental types, and that's a lot of what tight ends are coming out of college, but they need a little bit more of a day one readiness. Like they need their top tight end to come from the draft, and I think the only way to do that and feel good about it is to draft one in the 1st or 2nd round.
Yeah, tight end is such a difficult position in the draft because it's so risky no matter kind of where you take them. I know our editor Nat Newell has run the numbers on this, and tight end along with wide receiver is sort of like the least amount of a sure thing in the 1st or 2nd round. This draft class though is just so deep. Everybody says, and the other thing I think that stuck out with tight end is just there's a bad crop of free agents. Like there wasn't a lot of guys in free agency that I was like, yeah, that guy really changes this. It was more like guys that you're like, it's kind of more of the same of what the Colts have had at this position. Like the Juwan Johnson deal, that's probably more expensive. It's probably more than he's worth. My understanding is he can't block even like a little bit. Like he couldn't block you. So I don't know how much I don't know if you want someone quite like that. And like, I think if you have a player like that, like if you have a player who really can't block, like you need to be a true difference maker as a receiving tight end. I don't know if Juwan Johnson is that. I'm trying to think of who else went off it wasn't a very good board.
Yeah, like Tyler Conklin is kind of
injured all the time.
Yeah, he's like decent at both, but not really a number one option.
Yeah, the investments like you said, I think there's probably still people out there that you can get a baseline in blocking or receiving if you end up needing it, that you wouldn't have gotten much more of in making an investment position. Would you trade for Dallas Goedert if he was available?
That one's interesting to me. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense from a fit standpoint what Shane Steichen was able to do with Dallas Goedert. The fear I would have with that, though, I looked into it, and the Eagles would basically save no cap space by trading Dallas Goedert at all. So it seems like if they were to do it, it's just because they think the draft pick's going to be more valuable than going forward with Dallas Goedert, or they can, there's future cap elements to that. But as far as like next year, it doesn't really change that. So he's going to come at a decent price and be about $10 million. So I'd be tempted to. I'd still think I'd rather try to take my shot on Tyler Warren and get that clock started in a younger player. But it's tough because as of right now, I'm starting to feel like Tyler Warren's not going to be there at number 14. So if you're talking about needing to make a trade anyway to get a Tyler Warren, do you maybe trade less to get, Dallas Goedert? It's an interesting conversation. I don't know.
One of the other things with Goddard that would give me pause is he's had durability issues. Really the last 5 seasons. He played 15 games in 2021, but the other 4 of those years, 11 games in 2020, 12 in 2022, 14 in 2023, 10 in 2024, and now he's turning 30. So I don't know. The injury issues there maybe are a concern for me. I might put that more on the if we somehow don't get a guy in the draft.
Yeah, I go back and forth on it because I look at it that way. You got a guy who's going to turn 30. He's got injury issues. He's making $10 million, and he's going to cost what I assume is at least a day 2 pick. On the other hand, though, like watching the Eagles in the playoffs, like Dallas Goedert was kind of a secret weapon for them in more ways than one. When he stepped back in there after missing some time at the end of the regular season, he went out and had 215 yards in just 4 games with almost 11 yards at target. Like teams would play the Eagles in zone coverage, to take away Jalen Hurts' scrambling lanes, and Dallas Goedert just eats that for dinner. And the Colts needed that kind of player last year. They did not have enough answers to zone coverage when Michael Pittman was banged up. And so that's, I think, a guy who's got that experience feel. That's harder to find in the draft. But this is a really good draft class. And then really for me with him, it was his ability to really seal that edge in the run game. That let Saquon just turn in. I mean, Saquon had an all-time season as it is, but come the playoffs when teams knew that they were going to run with him, they still had no ability whatsoever to stop it, and it brought such an explosiveness when teams would bring that safety down into the box. Now Saquon just has to out-leverage the safety in the middle of the field. So I try to envision a world where Jonathan Taylor is doing that, because the last time Jonathan Taylor was great last year, like a 1,400-yard rusher, but the best version we've ever seen of him was when Jack Doyle was that guy, both sealing the edge and kicking out those linebackers on the wham block. So to get a guy who's established at both, it is really tempting. So based on cost, I'd be open to it, but I still think like starting the clock with a very young version of that in Tyler Warren, who doesn't have durability concerns, that's more of a building block player, and that's really what you're hoping to get out of this. So it's probably one I would circle back on if they just
somehow lift
a little bit. Yeah. Which means if you're dealing with Howie Roseman and you are stuck like that, you're going to pay some more, but it's still probably the way I would
go. Number 2 need, they don't have a starting weak side linebacker. They have Jalen Carlies. I think there was reason to feel good about him from a coverage standpoint. I don't know if you feel like he's an automatic starter yet. I also think that I've had this thought in my head for a while. I know the Packers do this. I'm trying to think who else would fit in this. I'm trying to think of another team that does this. But, like, if you get a good coverage linebacker in this draft, a weak side linebacker who can cover, and Carlies continues to take a step forward, that's not a bad thing. Because you can make Zaire Franklin into a 2-down linebacker. Like, is he making more money than that? Yeah, probably, but I don't care about that. I care about what's best for the team in terms of stopping people. And so, like, I think that's one. It's also one that you definitely do through the draft. Like, any player you would have signed in free agency was like kind of re-signed with their own team. Like, right. I know is it Sherwood from the Jets?
Yep.
There was a lot of people who were like, Jamie and Sherwood, like, this is a guy who's going to be like a good fit for the Colts. Well, he was never available. He was gone before free agency even started, Zach Bond, some of those other guys. That was one where,
I mean, Dre Greenlaw was super fun, but the deal he signed for, it was like, you're going to choose him or Cam Bynum, not both.
Yeah. And Greenlaw is younger than I realized.
He missed a lot of last year with the Achilles tear. So
which is also a little bit of a concern. And here's the other thing. If there's one position that Chris Ballard has done a really good job drafting and finding starters and guys who really develop into good players, it's linebacker. He's found players at linebacker consistently throughout his career there and throughout the rounds too. Like, I think since they need a starter, I think that pick is maybe higher than it. Like, I don't think you're getting a Zaire Franklin developmental type prospect, or Anthony Walker developmental type prospect, that kind of guy. I think it's more of an Okereke Leonard pick, but the two guys I mentioned were great, So he knows what. I think he does a good job of projecting what guys need to be at the next level, knowing what they need to be for Anarumo's defense, or for the defensive coordinator he has. That kind of always felt like you would best fill it through the draft. It is also interesting to me that EJ Speed has not been signed anywhere. I can't say I'm surprised by it, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it's also a great linebacker draft class. Really, really fun. And it's fun at the top with a guy like Jahad Campbell. I just keep getting more and more interested in if they can't get Tyler Warren. I think that's got to be my number 2 option there right now. Just an absolute athletic freak out of Alabama. But even like you go into rounds 2 and 3, there's plenty of guys that you feel good can step in and be really nice players on third down, which is what they need. Carson Schwesinger's a guy out of UCLA that you look into him, he's just kind of does everything and jumped, out of the Lucas Oil Stadium at the combine. The thing though is, so Chris Ballard is really good at drafting that spot, but I feel like his defenses have been very different when they've had a coverage linebacker they've taken on day 2 versus not having that. So back when Shaquille Leonard obviously was at his peak, that's going to be the all-time hit for him in the draft. But Bobby Okereke was like that too. So Shaq had to miss a year. Bobby steps in, has a great year, and earns a big contract from the Giants. And their coverage was at that third down abilities of the linebackers were great. When they lost Bobby and Shaq couldn't come back from the injuries, that position is really cratered because we learned that that's not EJ Speed's game, even though athletically it could have become that. He just never got the feel and the instincts and the discipline to be good on third down. And then because of you lose that type of player at one linebacker spot, it brought out the worst in Zaire Franklin's game in coverage. He tried to compensate as a blitzer. That's not his game either. So, yeah, I do think they need to move Zaire to more of a two-down player. It's not going to be the best bang for their buck on the contract, but it is going to be best for their defense. And so with Jalen Carlisle, he is very intriguing, I think, as a cover linebacker. But, we're talking about a guy that didn't even play 250 snaps last year. So I just think he needs more time. And also, I just don't think they should get in a spot where, like, if they have one injury to a linebacker, no one can cover there, because that's just going to get them right back in the spot they were kind of in last year where it's just too obvious to find the answers on third down against this defense and coverage. And so that's where I think like linebacker needs to be. You could maybe wait till like the third round because this draft class is really good, but that's a need they really need to fill, I think, by day 2. Not wait till day 3, since we've seen like the day 2 version of Chris Ballard's defense at linebacker is just so much better.
And day 3 is going to take time. Like Anthony Walker didn't play much his first year. Zaire Franklin took 4 years. Like the day 3 linebacker is going to take time, whereas they need a starter right now. So I think first 3 picks is the spot for that. What do you got beyond? So that's our first 2 needs. Now let's get into some of the sneakier, less obvious ones.
Yeah, what's interesting, the other ones is it's sort of weighing like the needs. It's one thing to discuss needs for this current year, the 2025 Colts versus overall franchise needs going forward. Because I think in terms of this upcoming year, I wouldn't necessarily say edge is like a big need, although it's not as strong as it was last year when they had Dio Dangbo. And now you're talking about Samson Ebukam coming off the Achilles tear, and that worries me a lot, even though it sounds like the Colts are wanting to give that a go. But they do have Kwity Paye in the 5th-year option. You expect a step forward from Laiatu Latu. And Taekwon Lewis, now that's some durability concerns too, but very good player when he's been out there. And by all accounts, at the time that he's had, you would expect it at his age to be able to bounce back. So they've got enough for next year, but then all of a sudden you look forward to Kwity Paye, last year of his contract, Samson Ebukam last year of his contract, and we'll see if he can bounce back. Taekwon Lewis contract year. It's going to end up putting a ton on Laiatu Latu to carry that group. So edge, there's certainly a world where you could draft one. I know there's some people who really think it's a bigger need than that, where they should maybe look at it in the first round. I'm not there just because of how many other needs they have, and namely how important it is to prioritize the ones that are going to help the quarterback out. But edge is it's an interesting one to think through, especially when we know that they have a GM that never feels like he has enough in the trenches. And so that's if we think it's at all a need, he's going to think it's a need. I'm just curious how prevailing of a need he ends up seeing it as.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty big need in one way or the other. We've learned over the years that counting on guys to come back from these Achilles injuries is I don't know, risky at best and foolhardy at worst. And Odengbo, I think one of the things is Odengbo got a lot of flack last year because of only 3 sacks, but like it's 745 snaps. It's your team leader in quarterback hits. It's your team leader in pressures. You really got to replace that. You just have to. And so I think it's a spot that you've got to have another player. Now, I don't necessarily know that it has to be a starter because you have Pay, you have Latu, you have you have options at those spots. But they're also missing a defensive tackle. So like defensive line in general, I would just bundle these all together. Taven Bryan played 340 snaps last year. Raekwon Davis played 349. Those guys, that's 680 snaps. Now you've signed Neville Gallimore. You don't have a replacement for that. So some defensive lineman at some point needs to be added who can play significant snaps, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency. I don't really know who's still out there in free agency. I think there's some. It doesn't sound like the Trey Hendrickson thing is possible anymore. All the reporting I've seen on that lately is that they're ready to move on with, like the Bengals are trying to keep him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think part of that is because their quarterback has a figurative and maybe literal gun to their head.
It's worked so far.
So I think that ship maybe sail, but there might be a possibility where you can still add a veteran at that spot. I just think however it works out, you just need to make sure you have at least one more guy there, and probably another tackle.
Yeah, if you wrap in the whole group, the line, that's an easier way to just see it. Like Dio is just hard to completely pin in either direction because he plays both, and he's a much better interior rusher than edge rusher, but he's a much better edge run defender than interior run defender. And so you're thinking about like, well, what spot specifically do they need? And I think, I don't know that they need a starter at any one of those spots, but a guy that can play that much and versatily would be big. I'll have to look more to figure out kind of who I think that is. As we talk through some of the other needs, I feel like it just feels like in their first 3 picks, tight end and linebacker have to be 2 of them. And so it's deciding, could you take an edge with that other one? You could. That's where like these other ones, I think you can make cases for and against them. That goes to edge, that goes to guard. I think you could throw DB in there in some ways, though less so obviously with what they did this offseason. And then at some point, I do think they need a boost at running back. But defensive line they certainly need it. They've got nothing that I would feel great about behind the defensive tackles, and it seems like they're going to need something, either more juice on the side of Kwity Paye or more bulk on the side of Latu. Tyquan Lewis is one guy who can do a little of both of those things, but he also gets, has his durability concerns. That seems a little bit more like because they're looking for kind of specific traits. I think that's usually where the middle rounds of the draft can help be a little bit more of a realistic place to do that versus high in the draft. But yeah, it's the thing that I don't want to see them do that. They went too far last year in terms of the volume of players they wanted to play and saying we had to have 10 guys available and rotating them, and then had some of the worst run defense we've ever seen in our lives as a result of it to start the year out, and a pass rush that I think it's fair when Chris Ballard says he felt like the secondary let them down, and that's definitely fair to a point. But the way that they were investing in that group and building it up, it should have overcome it more than it did. It didn't hit that high level, and I think part of it's that they just didn't let guys get. I just don't know that they let guys really get into a flow with how much they rotated. So I guess that could be an argument for maybe going a little bit higher investment in one player versus trying to bring in like several other ones. So I don't know, that could be a reasoning to maybe go at it like the third round. I've seen some people think that it's like a first round player, and I don't know how those pieces would fit if they went at it in the first round. You're paying Kwity Paye $13 million this year. You've got Laiatu Latu, who's the number one defender drafted last year. You certainly could open the door for another one, but if you're going to pay Samson Ebukam to come back, I don't know, that it just feels like you could get back in a similar spot as last year. Now, granted, you have the DBs now, so maybe it all comes together, but I wouldn't want that to come at the expense of getting your starter at tight end or linebacker, which I just think are so much bigger needs than all these other ones that we're talking about.
My next, you kind of already hinted on this, but my next need is just they need more in the offensive line. I don't really think there's any way around that. They lose Fries, they lose Kelly. I know you feel like you've got Bordellini at center. You've already signed Danny Pinter, and you liked him enough to start him 2 games last year, so that's good depth on the interior. But it's just a lot of guys. It's just a lot of guys that are gone, a lot of snaps that are gone, and I don't love that. I don't love that. I think you got to replace it. But I also think that Chris Ballard already told us where it was coming.
Yeah.
You know, he said at the combine that that this team was going to that he liked the depth in the middle rounds, and so I think it's probably pretty reasonable to expect that you're going to get a pick like a Bordellini or Gonzalez there in the middle rounds, 3rd or 4th round. It just seems like that's where I think part of it is they feel like they have some confidence in their ability to find a guy like that after last season. I also it just seems like it's the most obvious thing to do. So I think there's going to be a middle round pick somewhere there. They'll probably add a guy like low cost, maybe, and hope that you get some more competition out of it. I think that one, like I said, until we get to the draft and he doesn't do it, I think he already told us what's going to happen there.
Yeah, and it's like linebacker, it's a spot he's just better at drafting than others. I mean, Will Fries was a 7th round pick. Braden Smith he's 2nd round.
Yeah, Braden was a 2nd rounder, high 2nd rounder.
Yeah, as a guard, and then moved him out to tackle. I mean, Bernard Ryman, it's hard to find good tackles in the 3rd round, and they chose a developmental one that has ultimately looks like it's going to work out. But yeah, they need some help there because while you can talk yourself into each individual projected starter right now, there's ways it's not what it was coming into last year. It's not proven. Tanner Bordellini is intriguing, not fully proven. And so you got centers set up with, in terms of the guys there with Danny Pinter, but that you could justify between Tanner Bordellini being a new starter and Braden Smith, dealing with some of the health situations and kind of being a little bit, I want to say the back nine of his career, but injury-wise, starting to creep into that direction. You can talk yourself into like right guard needing, like maybe they need a player closer to Will Fries, who eventually priced himself out. But that was a very helpful, when he was out there, a very helpful glue. I thought Tanner played really well when he played next to Will Fries, and a little less so without him. So I look at guard as that, to me, would be the sneaky sort of, well, with Chris Ballard less so sneaky, but fallback spot in the 1st round. If they get sniped on Tyler Warren and Jihad Campbell and guys like that, and it just doesn't feel like there's a player who fits, like who's worth the value of a 1st round pick. Maybe it's a trade down and draft spot that could very much be a Chris Ballard thing. So you look at a guy like Tyler Booker from Alabama, just an absolutely massive guard that who could really take this run game to the next level. Again, it's not. I don't think it should be their plan A or their plan B, but if they just get caught between some different things, which happened a little bit last year. Like I think they were hoping to get Brock Bowers last year, and he went like 2 picks before them. So if that type of thing happens this year, and they're able to trade back and do this, I don't think it's the worst thing because they still have to get so much out of this run game to be the difference-making element of their team. They have a quarterback situation that has to get ironed out. Now they're losing an elite pass protector at right guard. They cannot have offensive line issues on top of the quarterback questions that they have. We've seen this franchise just go up in flames when they've had both of those going on at the same time. And then once they fix they usually have one or the other a little bit more. But yeah, I don't know. I could see a world where they draft a starting guard just if that's what fits where they're at in the draft, and then maybe Matt Gonzalez is simply more of a he's a swing tackle for another year when you've got injury concerns at right tackle, and then let him develop into the right tackle starter. I could see that, but it's hard to figure out because also maybe they look at Gonzalez as a right guard option, and that lessens the need here too. But either way, at the very minimum, a mid-round guard pick feels quite likely.
What's your next need? We've kind of gone through what I think of as the big four.
Yeah, if we get out of the main ones, I'm going to put running back up there. So obviously they've got a star in Jonathan Taylor. They signed Khalil Herbert, which certainly is an improvement upon what they had last year, which was basically nothing behind Jonathan Taylor. I think he's a good fit as a runner with a mobile quarterback on zone setups, but I think they could do a little bit better than that at the number 2 spot. This class is just so good at running back. This is one of the greatest running back classes you're ever going to see, not just for guys at the top like Ashton Jeanty and Marion Hampton, but all the way through it. You can get down to a guy I've brought up a lot, is Damian Martinez out of Miami as a mid-round guy that could be something more in the Zach Moss mold. I think would be very helpful for them. So that's capable on third downs. I don't think has to be necessarily a Nyheim Hines weapon on third down, but certainly more capable than Jonathan Taylor. But a guy who's just a real sort of bruising runner at that stage of the game when you give Jonathan Taylor a break and you can just bring in this fresh bruising runner. I thought Zach Moss fit that really well, especially when he played with the mobile quarterback and kind of got light in boxes, got to the second level. So some guys like that. So it's like Khalil Herbert, he could be your number 2, but also I just would really like another option there because Jonathan Taylor also, like almost all running backs, has some durability questions. And you want a situation where if he goes down, I don't think you want to put everything on Khalil Herbert to kind of keep this a very run-heavy team. I think they could really use a guy, and it's a position where you could draft it 4th or 5th round and get something really good with this draft class and just the nature of that spot.
Yeah, I've been thinking, they needed 2 all off season. I want to see that guy be more versatile. Khalil Herbert, his history of catching the football is not spectacular. I think you could definitely. I want somebody like that, and I think you just make a pick at that position. It's the best way to replace that position, and you're dealing with like the deepest. It's just a no-brainer to keep drafting there. Beyond running back, so those are like the big 5 to me, in terms of needs. Another tight end.
Yeah, exactly.
another tight end is probably the next one. What do you think about the possibility? We'll end the podcast with just a short thing here. What do you think about the possibility of a day 3 pick at quarterback?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting in the sense that, Daniel Jones is here on a 1-year deal. He's going to try to win this quarterback competition. If he doesn't, he'll be the backup who probably plays some. But I don't think he's here for long I don't think he and Anthony Richardson are going to stay here together. I'll say that. This is a 1-year thing between the 2 of them. So I don't think it's a bad idea to look at a quarterback on day 3, sort of like they did when they drafted Sam Ehlinger, and see if you can develop a backup that way who doesn't feel pressure to play this year because you've got these 2 guys. I would yeah, I don't think it's a bad idea, especially this quarterback draft class. It's been poo-pooed a lot because the top options are not that good. But I think if you think in terms of, hey, we need a backup, there's several guys that are pretty interesting in that way, from Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, Kyle McCord, Curtis Rourke. I think a lot of those type of guys, if one of them slips enough on day 3, I would not do it before day 3. But you already mentioned. So yeah, I think you get into sort of the 5th and beyond range, maybe 4th and beyond range. It makes some sense.
Yeah, they're going to need an emergency quarterback. Teams like the Colts have just pretty much just carried that guy the whole time. Since that rule went into effect, and I kind of think you just do it. So that's kind of where I'm at with needs. Maybe in a couple of weeks when we don't have anything to do, we can talk about would you take Shedeur Sanders if he falls?
That'll be fun.
Something spicy like that. But for right now, that's the needs. I'll have a lot more from them. I think specifically going to the owners' meetings, like as a preview for people, I'm really interested in, more than anything, I'm interested in how do you see the Daniel Jones, how do you see Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson, like, how do you see that playing out? What are your thoughts? Like, what are their thoughts on it? That to me is the biggest thing, because I really think that we kind of know. I really think that we kind of the piece on what they did with the secondary and free agency sort of just speaks for itself to me. So how they see the quarterback position, and then the really interesting thing would be if Jim Irsay does talk, which I don't have any indication of that yet. But if he does talk, having him explain the decision to run it back with Ballard and Steichen, that becomes the most interesting thing if he talks. So that's kind of where my head's at. That's what I'll be pursuing while I'm down there. For the Colts Cover-2 Podcast, I'm Joel Erickson. This is Nate Atkins. We are kind of in the lull here between free agency and the draft, but it'll start kicking up on the draft here pretty soon.